Well, my next guest is Matt Campbell. He lost his brother Jeff Campbell on September 11th, 2001, at the North Tower, the World Trade Center. The family was told that his official cause of death was due to the impact of the airplane, allegedly causing the collapse of the North Tower, but the family isn't buying it. And a lot of us aren't buying it. They demanded an inquest into his death, which you're allowed to do under British law. They did this after a mountain of evidence emerged showing that a controlled demolition may have brought down the towers, not the airplanes themselves. After 2 years of waiting, the UK Attorney General has now denied the family's application for this inquest, an inquest they are legally allowed to pursue to find out the exact cause of his brother's death. Silenced. So what is the government trying to hide here? Matt Campbell joins me now. Matt, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Clayton. Thanks for having me on.
And of course, terribly sorry for your loss and what your family had to suffer on that day. For our audience that doesn't understand what happened that day, what did your family experience? Where was your brother on that day? Can you give us a little history here for some context before we get into some more of the details about this inquest?
Sure. He was attending a conference on the 106th floor of the North Tower. We were actually on holiday in Lanzarote as a family, and basically, like everyone else, watched those attacks on television. And he was there. It wasn't his normal place of work. He normally worked at Midtown, so we weren't concerned that he would actually be caught up in the attacks. And of course, within a few hours, we found out that he was there, and and then the shock, the crazy period that we had for certainly days, if not weeks, immediately afterwards.
Did you accept from the beginning the official narrative of what had happened? Planes hit the towers. That's what killed my brother, or did something early on trigger you that maybe something was amiss here?
I'd say pretty much early on we accepted the official narrative. It wasn't until I read an article which was more by a journalist called John Pilger that was looking into what the British and the US armed forces were doing, did I really start to question, okay, what have we been told and why are we going to war in Afghanistan? And majority of the hijackers were Saudi. What's going on here? And they were trained in Germany and in the States. A lot of things didn't start to make sense from a very early point, sort of, talking November 2001.
So in November of 2001, you started questioning this. What did you then do to try to get answers about your brother's death?
Well, it wasn't really until he did actually have an inquest. That was in 2013, where effectively they rubber stamped, I think, what the 9/11 Commission had said and NIST had said about how the towers came down.
Which is what, and this is 12 years later. This is 12 years later
Yes.
that they finally had an inquest, and they sort of rubber stamped what the 9/11 Commission said and that the FBI, whatever. What did they say specifically happened? That the planes hit and the towers melted essentially, and that's what brought the towers down?
I mean, the actual summary that they had on the Inquisition form is pure and simply, at 8:46 on the 11th September 2001, the deceased was on the 106th floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center when an aircraft, AA-11, was deliberately flown into the building, causing its collapse at 10:28. This event was part of a coordinated attack by the Islamist militant group Al-Qaeda. I mean, that was their conclusion of what happened. I mean, I think the specific thing to focus there is that it was the plane's impact that brought down the towers. Even though I now know they were presented with no evidence to prove that the towers actually came down because of the impact, the plane impact and the fires.
So no evidence that they were brought down because of the impact of the airplane. Therefore, what did bring down the towers? What does your family believe? And then what evidence emerged that led you to push for a new inquest?
Well, I mean, I believe it's explosives and incendiaries, and a lot of work has been done by a lot of independent journalists and physicists and engineers over the years. And I only really started looking at that in about 2007. So a few years before that first inquest, and I think it was probably, 7, 8 years ago. I just felt that, okay, we've had that first inquest. There's all this evidence that's out there. How can I kind of bring that back into a court of law to let it be examined, and obviously to reopen my brother's inquest? And that was basically the process that I started. I mean, there's tons of evidence out there. It's criminal that they didn't actually look at the mountains of evidence that's out. And I should add, eyewitness testimony of first responders, police officers, etc.
Let's talk about, so you've, because of this evidence, which I want to get into in a minute, and I want you to go through a few key points here that we'll put up on the screen and we can show our audience. But you received a response now from the Attorney General in the UK after 2 years of waiting to open up a new inquest based on this new evidence. And I just want to I want to quote this Attorney General's response about your brother. So they're basically saying the application alleged that the original inquest was deficient on the grounds of insufficiency of the inquiry based on the discovery of fresh evidence. They don't think that this new evidence is sufficient to open a new inquest. They say the events leading up to the attack on the World Trade Center were thoroughly investigated by the FBI. Case closed. We use that information. We don't see any reason to do our own separate investigation. They say, furthermore, quoting now, the solicitor does not consider the expert and eyewitness evidence about pre-planted explosives that would make a meaningful difference to the verdict or shed further light on how the deceased came about his death. So the solicitor is saying, despite all of the expert and eyewitness evidence about pre-planted explosives, we don't feel that would make a meaningful difference to the verdict about how this deceased came about his death. I mean, it's there in black and white. They're literally telling you that evidence about the pre-planted explosives, we don't see it as a big deal. I mean, am I wrong about that?
I mean, that's what they're saying. It's absurd to say that it wouldn't make a meaningful difference to the verdict. I mean, there's like I said, with an inquest, they have to find out basically how someone died, yeah? And there's a big difference between being killed by a building collapsing naturally or actually through the use of explosives. That would have a completely different verdict in any other inquest into someone's death.
Right.
The fact
An airplane hit the towers and brought them down. I'm sorry. I'm just so furious about this. I mean, I know your family's been dealing with this for years, but the idea that there's someone planted explosives and brought the buildings down and made it look like it was an airline attack that brought the buildings down. Wouldn't we want to all know about that? And it's being silenced. So you have until September. You have until September to appeal this, and you have to raise money in order to do this. I want to have a link in our description of this video if anyone wants to help your family to get an inquest, to get this appeal through. Tell us about that. You're up against a deadline.
Yeah, so I mean, what we're challenging the Attorney General on is actually, it works in our favour. It's purely on points of law. I mean, their response is essentially unlawful. And what we will do in seeking judicial review is to basically pull apart the reasons why they've refused permission. So that involves obviously a barrister who represented in the first application, putting together strong legal arguments as to why the Attorney General's decision is actually unlawful and irrational, which are points that can be made and in the past have previously successfully been made against authorities in the UK using this process called judicial review. So yeah, we've got up until the end of September to apply for judicial review. We're in the process of raising funds. We're about halfway through our target, which is it's about £40,000, $50,000. And so through generous donations of people from when we started the first application, we're hoping now we can continue with challenging the Attorney General's decision. So the website that we're taking donations through is ic911.org, which is the International Centre of 9/11 Justice. There's a donate button, I think, on the top right of the homepage.
And we will have a link in the description if any one of our audience wants to support this, because I honestly feel like your case is one of maybe the only case, one of a few or maybe a handful that we could actually get answers by going through this legal process, where we could actually have legitimate answers as to what happened on that day. And so if anyone wants to donate to help you, I would encourage you to do that in the description below, even if it's $1, $5, whatever it is, to help get these answers and to help your family. I wanted to talk quickly, though, about some of the evidence here. Some of our audience that might be skeptical, saying, I've never heard this before. A controlled demolition of the North Tower or the towers themselves? We talked about Building 7, but really? So what evidence can we talk about here specifically that stands out to you that are red flags?
I mean, I think for me, the simplest thing is just looking at it. That's not a building that's collapsing. It's basically purposely being exploded out. I mean, you've got, as well as, the steel beams being thrown out 200, 300 feet. That's well documented at crazy speeds. You've also got horrible scatter plots of people's remains being found, again, 200, 300 meters outside the footprint of the towers. Any other normal building collapse, you find almost whole remains when the buildings are pancaked down. I mean, to date, there's still 40% of the victims that died there haven't been identified at all. There's nothing. There's no trace of them. There's just lots of tiny, small fragments, which is what they found of my brother. I think the constant acceleration of the North Tower for about 4 seconds when it first starts to fall, it should be slowing down. It can't keep destroying what's underneath it without slowing down, and it does the opposite. It starts to accelerate, and it does that at a constant rate of for about 4 seconds. There's a lot of evidence that's out there. I said architects, engineers for 9/11 Truth. There's a physicist, David Chandler, who's done a lot of videos that you can still find on YouTube, describing in kind of very exact detail what's happening from a physics point of view, and what isn't happening compared to what the official narrative is saying. So
one of the most
yeah.
compelling pieces of video for me was that before the airplane strikes the tower, there's an explosion. And, seeing that video, which I'm sure you've seen, how does that happen? How does, before the aircraft strikes the tower, there's an explosion clearly seen in this footage? Have you seen that?
Yeah. Yes, I have. And, I think there's a janitor, William Rodriguez, who has documented exactly what he heard in the seconds prior to the actual plane impacting the tower. Whether that went off too early or it was important to detonate it beforehand, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of eyewitnesses, 150 odd, who basically are witness to explosions or explosives going off on the day. And they're first responders. They're not, average members of the public. They are actually first responders.
Well, our thoughts are with you, and our show is behind you. We hope that you'll get answers. We hope that we can shed light on this story. We hope our audience will support what you guys are doing, and we hope that there will be a positive outcome in September. And we hope that maybe the law will prevail this time, and this won't be silenced. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. And again, sorry for what your family has had to deal with and suffer through on this. Thank you for coming on the show and being brave about this.
Thank you, Clayton. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.